All right. Well, I want to honor all of you who were punctual, showing up right at the noontime hour here on the East Coast. I know we have folks dialing in from across North America, so really nice to be with you all today. My name is Alyssa Wright. I have the gift and honor of being the lead steward of Wright Collective, a community of consultants based here in New England, but working throughout the globe to mobilize resources for social justice. I am tuning in from my own beautiful home here in Maine on some beautiful Wabanaki lands up here. And I'm really thrilled today to be able to present with my colleague and dear friend Elizabeth Ireland, who's tuning in from Detroit, Michigan, to be with us today. She's been a grant specialist and writer for several of our projects over the last year. And we've been in the landscape, Elizabeth, learning quite a bit for the last 9 months. So we're happy to
Indeed.
bring some of that to you all today. I also want to honor and acknowledge Andrea and Sarah from our team who are here as well. If you have questions that come up during this time, please pepper them into the chat and we will try to answer them at the end when we have a little bit of time for Q&A. But thank you all for arriving. And so for those of you who are just jumping in, if you want to throw into the chat your name, organization, and where you're tuning in from, good to build a little bit of community there. And I am a millennial who really loves the reaction function. So please give me all the hearts and thumbs up and sad faces as I share things about the philanthropic landscape, because there's a couple of emotions out there. How are you all doing? So I just want to honor and acknowledge this roller coaster of a time that we're on, and also want to, allow you to make space for your very important self while we spend this hour together. So if you want to turn off your video or go nourish and nosh and grab a sandwich or a cup of water, please feel free to do so. Most of today is a presentation, and then I'll be tagging you all in for some Q&A. Judy, now you're my favorite because that was the best emoji use ever. So I appreciate you. Yeah, there you go. Great. Um, Elizabeth and I were chatting a couple months ago with Sarah on our team about some of the things that we're seeing in the landscape right now. And so I first and foremost just want to say thank you for all the ways in which you all are supporting the communities that you steward through your organizations to make sure that they are safe and healthy and well during this really intense time. So I just want to honor that first and foremost. I also want to honor that there's been a lot of changes in the funding landscape. We know that government funding has become very fragile and disappeared and been frozen. And there's still question marks for us around our projects if 6 and 7 figures of capital will show up in the next 6 months. We have no idea. Maybe, maybe not. And so we're living in this time where I feel like as fundraisers, and folks in philanthropy, I think it's bringing up a lot of wounding for those of us who have been in the field, maybe like myself, for 20 years now, of just how quickly people can change their minds and we can be resource scarce and not be able to take care of our people. So it's a really emotional time while we're going to talk about strategic grants and how to make a really nice looking spreadsheet and where to find new opportunities and what to put in your proposals. While this work is technical and transactional, it's deeply relational and emotional, and I just want to make space for that too. So if you have questions today about some of the relationships that surround your grant program or your, some of your prospective grant opportunities, as comfortable as you are sharing that, I'm happy to make space for that today. And Elizabeth and I have also been carrying that weight as we've gotten some wonderful yeses and some big no's and been ghosted to the point where we weep into chamomile tea on Friday nights. There we go. So it's been a roller coaster for sure. What you're going to hear a little bit today from us is just sort of some high level. So for those of you who are brand new to building a grants program that is strategic, which means every move you make is very intentional. That's what we're going to kind of infuse into today. But I also want to make space for the more seasoned grant writers to comment in the chat and build community. So if there's things, again, you want to throw into the chat as we share things like, oh, we tried that, or, that's worked really well for us historically, we definitely want to tune into that. And before I get started with the formal presentation, I just want to hand it over to you, Elizabeth, if you want to say hello to the room and share a little bit of what you're looking forward to sharing today from the Wright Collective side.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. As Alyssa mentioned, I'm based in Detroit. I've been a grant writer for a bit over a decade, and I've been with Wright Collective for almost a year now, and it's been a real pleasure to get to expand beyond just the Metro Detroit area into the national grant writing space. And I'm excited today to dive into the conversation and kind of share some strategies like Alyssa mentioned, that have worked, but also acknowledge the changes that are happening and how to handle those.
All right, let's kick it off and get started. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So we're going to speak today from a place of yes, the next, don't laugh, everyone, but what are there 4 months left in the calendar year? It's very sad how quickly the time goes by. But not only for the remainder of 2025, talking about how important it is to think about your program, again, mostly for those of us raising in the United States, thinking about it in the current landscape, but also really keeping an eye to next year. And so at Wright Collective, it's really important to us when we build grants programs and we do grants research, and we think about institutional partnerships, that we think about it through the lens of the long term. So donors always come to the conversation you invite them to. If you speak grant cycle to grant cycle, they're going to speak grant cycle to grant cycle, right? So what we really want to talk about today is how do you set yourselves up with a grants program that yes meets the moment, but also has a good 2 to 3 year vision and lays a foundation for you to really be thinking about, depending on what kind of strategic plan iteration or, business plan moment you're sort of in, what it really looks like for funders to step in as partners and to fund from a place of trust based philanthropy and real systems change. So, things to think about as we go throughout today. If you leave with little golden nuggets of things that Elizabeth and I will share, one of the things that I think is really important is this idea of donors come to the conversation you invite them to. Grant makers come to the conversation you invite them to. So when you reach out and you blindly say, hey, I'm really curious in this RFP you put out, I have a couple of questions. Those questions start a conversation of where you're leading a donor to think about also funding. So I know on the movement and nonprofit side, I feel like I'm always doing funder education because yes, funders know many things, but they don't often always know everything about our communities facing and what we need again to both meet the moment but build longer term systems change. So I'm going to name some trends here, and then I'm going to pop it over to you, Elizabeth, to kind of share how we've seen this manifest a little bit in some of our current client work across the portfolio at the collective. But some things we've noticed this year, and actually this is really indicative of what I've seen during any time of volatility or uncertainty that we've gone through um, with clients and in the fundraising world. I got my start fundraising during the first recession in 2008 and 2009. And so, having my career start during that time and then going through Hurricane Katrina and the first Trump administration and the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of social and political unrest when I was fundraising in East Africa and in Eastern Europe. I feel like almost every time I've gone through those environments, we're seeing very similar things to what I'm going to share with you that we're seeing today. The first is that your current grant makers, which it won't surprise you, usually will go really deep with you and really want to show up and step up. So this year it's manifested in a couple different ways across our portfolio. Some of the burst centers that we get to work with, we've seen them be offered secondary grants or the opportunity to apply for a 3 year when they were only in a 1 year grant cycle. We've also seen some folks who said, yeah, we were planning on changing our strategy, but we actually are going to stick with you for one more grant cycle because it's rough out there. You can apply again this fall. So most current grant makers I've seen really open to conversations about exploring not only the existing relationship you have to them with philanthropy, but also potentially creative capital. So one of our clients we just found out actually 2 weeks ago is getting a 1% interest loan to finish a project because they feel like the philanthropic landscape is going to need more time for them to gather more philanthropy to offset the cost of something that they're building. Um, We've also seen grant makers reaching out around volunteerism and trying to figure out other ways they can donate in kind, they can broker connections. So, kind of that time, talent, testimony, ties is coming in while they're also giving you the treasure. So, we're definitely seeing current grant makers going deep. And also, again, want to say if your grant makers aren't your current institutional partners, you should ask them to. You could leave today and say, oh, I went to this training and I heard about how a lot of grant makers are, offering additional capital right now. Do you see yourself doing any other rapid response cycle at this time or allowing for an additional allocation of, the current grant funding that you've been giving to us? Again, donors come to the conversation you invite them to, and we can always push back a little bit and make the space to see what's possible. We're also seeing grant makers become more nimble or less predictable in their requirements and communications. So even current grant makers, like some of them we haven't heard from for 2 or 3 months when we've expected them to respond immediately because they're also going through some internal tumult, restructuring, whatever it might be. We've also seen them becoming, and I'll pass it off to you, Elizabeth, if you want to share some examples of this that you've seen in your portfolio work. But we're also seeing them become more nimble, where many of them have just basically said, hey, whatever you need to use it for right now, go ahead. So I don't know, Elizabeth, if you have some examples of that too.
Yeah, I've seen some grant makers say these are our parameters, these are the areas that we give in, but you know where best to spend the money. So we're not going to either the budget that you make, whatever you turn in for your final report, it's okay. Or if you need to adjust that budget or something, I've seen things like that happen. And they're also have been open to more operations spending than I had seen in the past. Another thing that we see that I've seen is a growing recognition that some nonprofits, particularly smaller ones or ones who have had to be nimble in these times, don't have the capacity to handle traditional grant management or grant writing. And so funders are seeing that and trying to make their requirements a little less onerous. I
Mhm.
cannot promise that everyone is doing that, but I've seen some people do it. So it makes me hopeful that maybe that will become a bigger trend in the philanthropic world. We'll see.
Yes, yes. Get on that trust-based philanthropy wave and just
Right,
keep
right.
serving.
It's
So,
good.
um,
Yeah. So from here, I think we wanted to move to the next slide and talk about the components of a successful grant program. Um, so the first thing that we see as very important for all organizations across all sectors is to develop a case for support. You'll notice that the looking for funders and prioritizing who to ask is later in this list. The first thing to do is to write your case for support, what you do to make an impact, what your vision is, and what what change is going to come from the funding that they might provide. And once you have that articulated, you'll be better able to walk through these next steps. Can you speak to what to do next when you create a culture of philanthropy, Alyssa?
yeah, I mean, I think, for those of you who have been to some of the trainings that I've facilitated before, I try to really speak about this idea of like no one owns the whole fundraising goal or the whole development program. So often I think many of us who are probably on today's call, or maybe still are, so, maybe you're job searching, just kidding. We're put in a director of development role where you're basically told like, yep, go raise 3 million bucks. Good luck. Maybe the board will help you or a couple of volunteers. It's so important that you really work to create a culture of philanthropy that doesn't create the circumstances, again, around grants where you're alone. So Elizabeth and I talk a lot in our work about how, it can't just be the grant writer or the development director finding all the grants, building all the relationships, managing the needs of the proposals, and also writing the grants. So again, you could say, I'm a really strong writer and I'm really good at the administration of the program, but I'm going to tag in some board members and our ED and others to help manage the relationships and do the cups of coffee, set up the check-in calls. You need to kind of think about how you disperse that labor and really, again, make everyone aware of what you're looking to fund with grant capital. Elizabeth and I often find too that, and I don't know, Elizabeth, if you have any examples of this, but organizations don't tell us what they need grant capital for, and then we go and apply to something for, to help them plant trees when they actually needed it to run a children's program around plant. Like there's like a disconnect in what they need the funding for and how it meets the grant maker, and then when they get rejected, they're kind of surprised. So it's nice to create a culture of philanthropy too by putting what your needs are in buckets and disseminating that broadly across all your stakeholders so they know what they can be on the lookout for when they're reading the newspaper or they're talking to people at their company about the philanthropy program.
Yeah, and that touches on something that I want people to go away with, which is the idea that you can be, if you aren't already, you ought to be proactive instead of reactive. So instead of just being on a bunch of email chains and waiting for things to come across your desk and then should we apply or shouldn't we apply, it's more successful when you have these foundational pieces, your case for support and a culture within the whole organization that's going to support your grant writing efforts. And then once those are at least on their way to being established, right, or if not well established, Then you go find opportunities that match what you need funding for, not just something happens to be out there that they have funding available for, so you're going to create a program for it, right? The other way, it should be the horse in front of the cart, so to speak. So then you get to number three, finding your funding opportunities. And we're going to talk in a little bit about how to research those and how to find specifically like the nuts and bolts of how to find opportunities. Once you have a list of those, then you can prioritize them because your list might be overwhelming. I hope it is. And that you can look, okay, between what is our capacity to fill out these applications and to make these relationships and to go after these applications, and what aligns best, then you can prioritize what you're going to do this year, what you might wait next quarter, things like that. And number five, very important, track your submissions and grant activities, particularly if you start getting awards. Definitely start to track their reporting dates, all of those things, whether they will allow you to apply again, whether they can be a multi-year funder. So when you get awarded, you have all that information. But also if you get denied, it's a good practice to reach out, see if they'll offer any feedback, and keep them on the calendar if you felt like it was a really good fit and their response might be, well, we just don't have enough dollars, but we did appreciate XYZ about your application. Keep them on your calendar for next year or next time that they are allow you to apply.
I can't tell you how important that is. Like, I think, Elizabeth, just to emphasize here,
Yeah.
I've inherited a lot of small to mid-size organizations. So, say your budget's less than 1 million, your staff is maybe less than 8 or 10, where there just hasn't been someone who's been at least tracking in the same location all of the grant applications. We actually inherited an organization about a year ago where they were just going into someone's email and they were kind of just applying ongoing. They weren't tracking them anywhere. And so we basically, and then we couldn't get access to that email. The email had been sunsetted when that individual left, and it was not a good situation. So even if you're a founder, an ED, a board chair, a development director, yes, it might be in your, we probably come into this problem a lot in our ecosystem in general. Yes, it might be in your brain, but you need to get it out on paper, in a spreadsheet, in a database somewhere, because even if you're just applying for 3 or 4 a year, all of a sudden you might have a board member bump into someone at the grocery store who's on the board of the bank and goes, "Oh, yeah, did you ever apply?" And you would have no clue to respond. So it's really important, I think, just the tracking piece, and being really intentional with the information you track in that too, which we'll continue to talk more about today. All right. So just to dig a little bit more into the story that you're telling to funders. So I think it's really important, just particularly right now for the landscape that we're in, that you're revisiting this and you're revisiting it frequently. And you're also speaking truth to the reality of the moment that you're in. I have seen some materials come out, I know many people are concerned about the cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and SNAP and like core programs that might really affect the communities that you all serve. And so what's been really important for us is to actually, really speak to the moment to grant makers and let them know that we need the resources now because no, we're not seeing the impact necessarily in 3 months, but we're projecting by the end of 2026 into 2027, our community is going to really be struggling. So it's important that you bring healthy urgency and reality to what you're putting into these proposals. And so I just want to name here at the top that I think it's really important that you're telling the story of what's really happening right now, what you need funding for, but with an eye to the reality of what could be possible into the future. I've had a lot of funders who've been reviewing applications come back and say, well, there was probably 3 or 4 hypothetical scenarios they named in it that could happen, but we didn't get a sense of what they're struggling with right now and what they need funding for right now in this moment. So again, finding a way to build that bridge and be genuine in the messaging is really important, especially when they're just reading an application. They might not know your organization or you that well yet. So always think about what the audience question is that you're answering. So Allison on our team, who's collaborated with Elizabeth and I on several grants, always says that she really part of the coaching when we work with organizations is to say, answer the grant makers' questions. Just answer them, right? Like literally take the question and turn it into an answer in your application. Don't put your, baseline language into it right up front. You might not be answering their question, and they are looking to see if you have seen and heard them basically in this process. I also think it's really important that there's narrative and, there's that driven story that's kind of tied into the data pieces that are also critically important. It's a balance of art and science when you're writing these grants and putting them together. So that's important to think about as well. Um, I want to pause here for a minute, Elizabeth, to let you share a little bit about the data and evidence-based pieces, because I know that you've been kind of working across grant proposals right now where you're incorporating that or seeking that.
Yeah, so for some organizations, it's really easy to tell the heart part of the story. And especially for people who run programs all day, I find that they have so many stories at the on the tip of their tongue. But in meshing those stories with the data is important for funders. I'm sure you all know that we live in a very data-driven world nowadays. And so especially for traditionally institutional funders, including research that backs the type of program that you're doing, or data points from the census that show what is the picture of the community that you're serving. Anything you can do to balance that, the story that you're telling, but also with here's the facts of what we're working with, those can help.
Yeah, and I think it's a good example here. We just included sort of when we're doing public health narratives, it's really important for us. We've been writing grants for the birth center ecosystem that we're really involved in to talk about the short-term and long-term impacts in the community, but also the broader movements that we're attached to. So just a reminder, sometimes organizations go, wait, I can pull from those medical journals or I can pull from those larger reports. Yes, like you can utilize whatever you feel like is going to help you make your case. It's also important to name what's unique about your organization. So again, in a very noisy landscape, like right up front, you should say exactly what's unique about your work. We've been applying for grant capital for a client up here in New England that's opening a community food center. It's the first food center in New England of its kind. So again, a lot of our grant applications lead with the opportunity to invest in New England's first community food center, and then we get into the nuance of what that looks like. That's what makes us unique in the landscape. And it's also important to connect to a broader movement and have a very clear call to action. I don't know if there's anything around these two last pieces, Elizabeth, you want to chime in and share from some of your recent work too.
I think it's important to note that your call to action is bigger than you as an organization. Your call to action is something for the people or community that you serve. So a grant proposal is not really about, hi, we need money. It's this is the change or this is the impact we want to make in the community and for individuals or for the environment or what have you. And this is how you can join us to do that. So that it feels, not only feels, but actually is genuinely more significant than just like bridge this budget gap for us. So that'd be what I'd say.
And I think that's another trend we're totally seeing, Elizabeth, in this landscape is that like people need to collaborate more. Like folks, you
Mhm.
need to be connected to regional organization or movement or coalition or what memberships are you a part of, what partnerships do you have? That's all really important. And I would also just emphasize that this is where too, like there's also opportunities for collaborative funding. So a strategic grants program might also mean that you're sitting down with a few other like-minded organizations together and you're saying, hey, how do the three of us apply for $1 million from this funder versus three separate $50,000 grants, right? So it's just a time where it's really important to be connected into more networks. We saw that a lot during the pandemic. One of our clients actually applied with three other organizations to get a $3 million grant for an education organization, and they secured it in 2020 when they had been rejected in a silo from that grant maker for two cycles. So just things to think about. All right. So I won't dive too much further into the culture of philanthropy for the grants program. But I think the most important too, maybe to add here is shared responsibility for development. So again, everyone, if you wanted to put one thing right now to start changing the culture around grants in your organization, explain what a foundation is at the next board meeting to everyone on the board and see if they understand the history of where foundations came from, where capital came from. See if they understand the difference between private and public philanthropy. Just start to pepper into volunteer meetings, donor meetings, board meetings, staff meetings. Make sure everyone is aware of what grant capital is and how they can access it, and the history of how it arrived as a philanthropic tool to our work. So again, you can start changing that culture by just generating awareness, so everyone starts to be aware of it, and then they start to feel responsible for being a part of that program. And then the other one I would say is fundraising as engagement. People don't engage their grant makers that well. Like program officers are always, I think, hungry to learn and be in community. We do that a lot with individual donors, not always with grant makers. So make your program more strategic by seeing it as part of your funder organizing strategy. And so, what I mean by that, and Elizabeth knows this from some of the projects we've done over the last year, is we do a lot of briefings to bring together institutional funders. So if you're wrapping up a capital campaign and you've had 12 grant makers give to it, have an open house for all of the grant makers to come. Do a special Zoom webinar just for them. When they see each other in the room and they start to get more engaged, they actually start to brainstorm together how they can better fund your work and who else they think you should know. So don't be afraid to build community amongst grant makers. That's part of this kind of culture change piece too, that can, leave you feeling less sad when you're December 31st at 11 p.m., about to miss a deadline because you don't know anybody at an organization. That's a perfectly matched grant for you. Never been there, huh, Elizabeth?
Oh, I
You've
don't know
never
what
been
you're
there.
talking about.
Yeah. Um, So I won't rest on this too much, but I do definitely want to share with folks, like, really network to build a great grants program. Make sure that it's not just, you're going to just the community foundation in your area or some of the local banks. Really start to draw on different relationships that you've collected over the years to see what's possible. So again, I would definitely be leaning into the opportunity for, you to think about national networks. Are you part of a national coalition for food justice or to end food security? Who's funding that network that might also want to fund you doing that work in Massachusetts or in Texas, wherever you might be? So, really, kind of draw upon building relationships in that space. I also will say since 2020, LinkedIn has kind of become a magical tool for people actually responding. So I will message program officers, trustees, other grantees of foundations and say, who do you think I should know? And I've actually gotten some really warm responses. So, Elizabeth, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add here. I know you have some examples from your
Yeah,
work
I've
too of,
used the networking piece as part of formal applications sometimes as well. So recently, I wrote one for an organization where they had done networking, found someone in their network who knew someone at the foundation who wrote a letter of support. And even though it wasn't on the formal list of the requirements for the application, we still attached that letter to make the connection with the organization. And it was ultimately successful. So sometimes like following their instructions is important, but occasionally throwing in, especially when it has to do with relationships, throwing in those extra pieces can be really helpful.
awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. I know. I feel like that's the other thing too with donors come to the conversation you invite them to. Like you can add extra things to grant proposals. I mean, again, I'm super cheesy, but like I've sent t-shirts and stickers and like invitations to our next, save the date for our gala. I've put other materials sometimes in with a grant application to say, just want you to know about who we are and everything else we're doing, which can also be tactical too. All right. You want to take this one, Elizabeth?
I would love to, because researching is an important part of your grants program. Like I said, to be proactive, to go get those opportunities instead of waiting for them to just come across your desk. And quick side note, I see the questions coming in on the chat and we will answer them at the end. So when you go to research for grant opportunities, there are databases, and I'll talk about those at the bottom here, but there are other places you can look to figure out what might be good funder matches for you. So the starting point is who currently funds you? Do you have any foundations, family foundations, even corporations who fund you? Have a conversation with them about who else they know in the landscape who might be interested in funding your work. And keep it, and you can open the conversation beyond just in your professional network, who do you know, but really in your whole network, who do you know who might be interested in what we do. Another strategic thing to do is to look at other organizations who do the same type of work as you and figure out who funds them. So I always ask organizations to to give me a list of like who else is doing similar, like what are the other housing organizations in this area? Okay. Then I go look at their annual reports, and in the annual report, most of the time there's that list of who gives to them. And then I know, oh, I hadn't thought about that foundation. Let me research them and see if they might also give because they're interested in this topic area broadly. So that's usually a good place to get more names on your list from. Another thing to do is to join, like Alyssa mentioned, join other groups. So your local nonprofit association usually will have an email blast that they send out with current and upcoming funding opportunities, as well as sometimes lists of funding for different sectors or regions or things like that. And finally, the most time-consuming piece is to then go on these search engines and look with search words and geographies and budget numbers. You can narrow down who gives, what foundations give to my type of organization. So there are a couple platforms out there that are subscription based, but are really worth it. The first is Foundation Directory Online. You can, fun fact, you can access it at most, not, I shouldn't say it that way. There are libraries that participate in the Foundation Directory Online, so they subscribe to it. So if you go to the Foundation Directory Online's website and search participating libraries, it'll bring up in your area what local libraries you can go to, and you have to go in person. Still, one of the few things that you can't just like access online with a code. You have to show up at your local library. Sometimes they're university libraries, and ask the librarian. And I have had librarians look at me like, what the what? But write it down for them. Like this, I know it says on the website that you have this subscription. Someone in the building will know how to log in for you. And then once you're logged in, I usually take a flash drive or something. I don't know, do people still use those? I email myself copies. Like you can download a PDF of the funders that pop up based on your search criteria. I hope, am I going too fast, Alyssa? Shake or nod your head. I know this is like technical information, but anyway, so you can download a PDF of the funders that pop up and then go do research on them later on your own time, on your own computer, but at least you can access the search history or the, you know, the list of the names that are relevant. You can really get a lot of detailed data on that website, like what their average grant amount is, a lot of different things. And there are other other forums for this. One's called Grant Station. One is called Instrumental. You can always try their free trials if you want to just like do a big gather of data and then go out onto each funder's website later and look at it. You can also talk with colleagues in the nonprofit space and see if anyone knows anyone who's a student at a university whose university might subscribe to this. There's ways to find your way onto these websites, or if you're at a very large organization, it might be worth the subscription cost because some of them also have grant management tools. So depending what you're looking for. Subscription cost for good online. I'm reading that question because it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about. I mean, it's in the thousands of dollars. It's a hefty subscription cost.
Yeah.
It's not cheap.
Yeah, that's why we always say like it's good to make a task force when you get your 30 days free and just say we're all going to get together for pizza for 3 hours and log in, upload, download as much as we can.
Right. I just download all the information onto something and then cull through it and actually read through it later. And lots of it doesn't end up being relevant, but I've gathered as much as I can. And then from there, you will prioritize your opportunities, right? So it's really useful to create some type of spreadsheet, whatever format works for you, with the relevant information. So you want to know the name. Do you have any connections in your network to this foundation? Anyone on your board, anyone on your staff, anyone on their board, anyone on their staff connected to each other? Do they have a deadline? Some foundations do not. Some have very hard and fast deadlines. So that's important to know. Some have multiple deadlines. So I would recommend writing them all down, because if you don't get to this quarter's, maybe you'll get to next quarter's, or depending how that goes. List other information that might be relevant from your research, like what are their priority areas? Who have they given to in the past? It's good to know if they've given to organizations similar to yours. It's also good to know about what their average grant amount is, so that you're asking for an appropriate amount. I worked with an organization once, and my main suggestion for improving their strategy was just to change the amounts they were asking for, because they were really inappropriate compared to what the funders usually give. So when a funder sees that, they're going to say, well, you don't have a clue, like you don't know anything about me. You didn't really research me very well. So it's like going to a job interview. You want to show that you've done your research. Um, and then any other, like what their website is, address, what the process for applying is, stuff like that. Sometimes it's useful to have different versions of this. So one version I usually do, what I've been doing when working with the Wright Collective, is this version that's really robust with all this information here. And then a snapshot version, that's a grant calendar that just says like name, date, amount, program in our organization that we're doing it for. And that's the type of thing that then you can bring to a board meeting and be like, here's what we're applying for, or what we have applied for. Here's our success rate. It's a quicker snapshot for people who don't need all this deep data. But you as a grant writer will use all this data.
And I was just going to say too, Elizabeth, I think people can't discount also to putting the staff and board of foundations onto something that board members see, or current
Yes.
see. I've done that several times. Excuse me. And board members have come back to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I used to work with that guy," or "Oh my gosh, my cousin, I didn't realize she took a job at that." Like literally people
Yeah.
are seeing people they didn't know were associated.
Yeah, that's helpful. And those pieces of information, I guess if I can say one more thing about the research, when you're doing all that research, one piece of information that you can download and that is publicly accessible is the 990 of these foundations, which is their tax return. And on that will be a list of their board members, and most often a list of who and how much they've given to. So if you want to make that list for your board as part of your culture of philanthropy, that would be one place that you can get that information that's publicly available for free. Um, so from here, I want to talk about, or we want to talk about, like just operationalizing your grants program so that you have a system in place and it starts to function like a well-oiled machine. So with all of these opportunities researched, create your calendar, prioritize based on what fits, what's the best fit. Some websites or list of places that an organization has given, you'll look at and you'll be like, that's us, like that's so perfect. And then some of them you'll look at and you'll be like, well, I think they might be interested, but like, well, it's worth a try. So with those different things, prioritize, because we all only have so many hours in a day, and some of their applications are much more lengthy than others. In the calendar, definitely also track other relevant dates besides just the due date of the application. Track reports, track when you can apply for a renewal if that's available. Um, and then if you are fortunate enough to be part of a team that's doing this writing or fundraising together, and you're not just the one person show, I've been that before too, but if you are part of a team, you can divide this out amongst each other, especially when it comes to the relationship building piece. And then that will help you forecast what says number 5 here, forecast the likelihood of awarded grants. When you know how well you know a funder, how many interactions you've had with them before even the application crosses their desk, then you might be in conjunction with the how good of a match it is mission wise, then you might be able to assess how likely do we think we are to get of all these grants that we've listed for 2026 fiscal year, how likely do we think some of these are? The other way to maybe forecast is to kind of back into it and say, we need $100,000 for this program, and we know our success rate of grant writing historically has been X. So how many applications do we really need to put out there based on that success rate to fill the budget for this program? Um, and then just as time goes on, you will build a toolkit, a well of documents that you'll realize you need. And you can Google this, like, what documents am I going to need for a typical grant application? Put them all in one folder, and then they're easy to grab. So you will definitely need your financials, your own 990 audit, and a current year's operating budget. If you're fiscally sponsored, you'll need that information from them. Your list of board of directors, sometimes they ask for their affiliations or their bios, or I've even had funders ask for their residences. Town and state is simple enough. Don't have to give out addresses. Your articles of incorporation, any relevant data like demographics or outcome reports that you do, and then any other um, collateral that you have within your organization that speaks to maybe your mission or the way that the voice of your organization, documents that give the case for your support, and keep those all in a place so that they're easy to access when you need to upload them to these applications. Is there anything else about that, Alyssa?
No, I think it's great. And I would just emphasize this additional evidence and collateral. Like, I just feel like sometimes organizations hesitate to send additional materials in. I'm not saying like you should always do, a ton of them, but I think the letters of support and other just like organizational documents, if you just did an impact report or if you just did a community needs survey, like send that in. I think that's interesting to funders and it'll just support making the case more and show them that you're in a strategic plan process and that you're really clear on impact measurement. So,
The other thing you
yeah,
can
no,
do with those documents, if there's not a deadline coming up, you can still mail them to funders. Definitely if they're already funding you, but also if you're interested in building a relationship with them and you did a really big impact report or you had something published or whatever, you can send that to them and see what happens.
totally.
Yeah.
I know I love I feel like we've gone back to an era too where some folks are saying you can mail a copy in or please do mail a copy. We've been mailing some grants in and it never used to, I mean, it always kind of existed, but it was gone for a while. And now there's an option to mail or digitize your application and
Yeah.
stamp it by noon on, October 15th.
Yep, I'm here for that. Me and my post office are ready for it.
There you go. So we just wanted to share a brief case study with you today from one of our clients that we work with, the Neighborhood Birth Center. We've been working with them for about 5 years now to build a grants program, and it was kind of a spin-off out of their capital campaign that we did. While they still haven't built the physical birth center, it's being built next year. It opens in early 2027. They are, however, doing advocacy and policy work to change the legislative landscape to accommodate birth center care. So they have that they're raising those funds through the organization for that work. They have a policy director, and then they're also raising money for community-based programming and core operating to stay the course to opening in 2027. So I just share this because, we've had challenges with literally trying to bring the physical space to fruition while we're still very active in the community with care and community activism around birth care. But I think what's been really important is that we established a clear case for support that spoke to philanthropy about a long-term vision and the need to open strongly with good grant partners. So Allison really built this program to say, when we open out of the gate, it's going to be really critical that beyond the capital campaign moment, we're going to have institutional grant partners that will fund core operating into the future. So a lot of what we focused the current grant proposals on was relationship building and narrative development, or the current activity of working on the program, the grant applications has been on really just building relationships and the development of the narrative within the community. We've had to bring early childhood funders who are more traditional, or we've had to bring, racial equity funders that haven't thought about maternal health, kind of along a continuum to think about how we fit into their work as a grant maker. Um, we've also really, again, this is, I think, an important piece to just note here. And I think, Elizabeth, you know this as well from other projects. There's been a lot of donor education. Elizabeth and I worked with a library in the state of Maine this year, where literally with some grant makers, we had to make the case for why libraries. Like people were like, why in a digital era are libraries important? And we were like, oh my gosh. So I think it's similar here with Neighborhood Birth Center. Like you still have to challenge some of the notions and assumptions around your work and why your organization is core to community well-being and health, or whatever it might be. So I think the thing here also too out of this case study and working with them over the 5-year window is that we've been able to secure almost every year 1 million+ in grants revenue. And because our relationship is good with funders, even when we've had some roadblocks with zoning for the actual physical clinical space, they've just said, hold on to the capital. When we open, like we know that you're going to use it to take care of your team and to help support families, and the programming will get right up and running. So we've actually gotten grant capital over the last 2 years that we are holding as reserve for when we open, because we already built the program and they know that we're, not turning back from this trajectory to open the birth center and provide care. So I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want to share anything. I mentioned the library, but sort of other things that you've been learning around some of what I mentioned with NBC.
Um, I think the relationship piece, like you said, I've had it happen. It's happened with the library where we brought to them one suggestion, like, would you be interested in funding this piece of the project? And because there's conversation, like it's an ongoing conversation before an application ever gets written, they say, no, we don't really want that. That's not our style, but maybe this that you mentioned. And then we go ahead and write the application or the formal request. But because those conversations have happened in the forefront, we can really tailor what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think it's a good example too. I think part of what we always all feel in philanthropy sometimes is that we're siloed, right? So we know historically donors have restricted funding in many ways, and it's been really difficult. I think that that is changing, as Elizabeth and I noted, like in some of the trends, like there's definitely a sea change with some of that that we are feeling. But I also think that in the beginning, it's building a relationship, right? So oftentimes it's okay, we're gonna, support you know the this one hire for a year, and then we'll keep talking, and then it opens up to a larger core operating grant, or hey, we're just going to support your initiative to support single parents, and then next year they open it up to support all your family programming. So I do want to just name that, some of the new grant makers that might come into your program, they might silo or restrict you in the beginning, but it's up to you as much as it is also on them that you also push the conversation to educate them on what's best for your entire mission, because we're living in a time where we need to be nimble and we need to have flexible funding. And so, if a grant maker hasn't understood that yet, or is still, again, maybe going to their board of trustees to convince them that that's important, because often I find directors of foundations or program officers, they're usually pushing on the boards to go along the continuum of that knowledge with you. You can equip them to do that well by, again, getting that entry level grant in and keep building that over time. So before we open up to Q&A, just want to let you know we're always around for a strategy session if you want to get 3 hours with us, where we can facilitate and guide you around your existing grants program. You might be in a place to create a pivot point right now in your grants program, or you might be in a place where you just need a little bit more insight around some of the prospects that you've researched and who's out there, or you might just need an update to your current materials. How are you framing things? And you want an extra set of eyes on your messaging. So we are here for it. We also do executive coaching packages where we kind of come in as a bit of a outsourced grants administrator for 3, 6, and 12-month periods, and really coach and guide you and add that prospect research to your well while you yourself are writing and building out those grants in the ecosystem. So we're always here for that if that's helpful to you as you build your grants program. So I'm going to stop my screen share and take another sip of water. And thank Elizabeth for sharing her spirit and brain and ideas with all of us today. Thanks, Elizabeth, for
My
being here.
pleasure.
And we're both here for Q&A. So I don't know, Sarah, if you want to, do you mind tagging us into some of what you've been seeing in the chat?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, does anyone want to jump on and ask a question before we go into what's in the chat? And some of the questions that are in the chat are, um, this is from Heidi. Is it appropriate to ask a board of trustees to help with the grant writing? Um, I don't know, Elizabeth, have you seen board members help and assist with grant writing in your past?
Yeah, I have, especially for smaller organizations, especially if you have a board member who happens to have expertise in that area. I've seen startup organizations use a group of volunteers to do something like grant writing and kind of get the program going. So whether those volunteers are community members who are really interested in what you're up to, or they happen to be board members. I wouldn't ask if they don't, I wouldn't push them to do it if they don't have the expertise, like the ability to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like like do all the little pieces of grant writing. You know what I mean? Like upload the right documents and have all the pieces together. If they're not organized like that, it might not be a good fit.
Yeah, I think where we've seen that falter, Heidi, is two things. One, the board member doesn't have the clinical, technical expertise background to speak to the grant making audience. They're just a willing volunteer who has the capacity. And then
Mhm.
we've also seen the flip side. So we've seen someone who has the technical skills and all of that, but then, they miss grant deadlines. They aren't able to manage the project of grants well. And so it can struggle. So I'd identify both things in a board member if you want to have them step in to support.
Yeah.
Great. So Terry asked, and I think I'm understanding this, that if there are programs and organizations due to the nature of the services they provide in the communities, I think, Terry, what you're asking is if it's delicate to bring foundations and people and program managers to sites, should you still do it? Or, how do you walk that line of being careful about protecting your constituents?
Yes, Sarah, you are right on ahead. So the consortium has 13, now 14 different programs, and some of them are really sensitive. Some of them have to do with being unhoused in the population. You want to ethically give people their dignity. And the program directors are very vocal, bless them. I love it. And they will say, because they come from lived experience, whoever they're serving, they are those individuals from that experience. And recovery, that's really sensitive. So, how do you have the impact that Alyssa and Elizabeth were having when you ethically and for some HIPAA reasons, right, cannot invite them into those spaces? Do you forego that? Well, right now we're just foregoing that completely. Not really sure.
Think it's important in your gift acceptance policy to also, and this is something we don't even look at our gift acceptance policy after we write it for the first time as organizations, but have some really clear guidelines and look at it every year around how funders can engage with the organization. And then you can reference it ongoing. So you can say, in our philanthropy policy, we name that here are the 2 events a year where we allow institutional partners to come and be in community with us. And here's why, and that's it.
Thank
So
you.
I've done that before. And I also think like as someone who's been the scholarship kid lined up to tell donors how grateful I was for them. I do think that like, it's important for the community to get the opportunity to do that if they want to. Some people really are willing and are like, I'll go to a donor meeting with you and say, this changed my life. I'm ready to sit down and tell them how important it was. And then there are other people who will say, heck no, I don't ever want to do that. That's not something that works for me. So I would just give people choice and autonomy in that. But I think, Terry, there are some folks who really are eager to tell their story. But yeah, I also think that, one of my first uncomfortable interactions was a community foundation walking through a housing facility and the food pantry and all of that. And it was very like
Wow.
spectacle of the poor people. And I
Wow.
just remember being like, what, they were asking questions of them about their life right in front of them. And I could tell the organization never even thought about it. They just saw it as like, oh, it's a site visit, it's a tour, and so I just think that you have to be so intentional and make sure that you have all the stakeholders surrounding it give their feedback and democratize a process to decide what's appropriate. Um,
Thank you,
but
Alyssa. That's
I really
very
appreciate you
transformative.
naming it. Yeah, I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Yeah.
So Paul asked about when you have an organization that has been getting a lot of funding from the government, how do you pivot? And I want to go back to something that Elizabeth said earlier on, which I think was a real eye-opening reminder for me, which was that if you look at other organizations that are very similar to your own and look at their annual reports and see who is funding them, you're going to find like-minded foundations. So maybe there are other either chess organizations or just organizations that are working with children, Paul, that you could consider tapping into and looking at um, their annual reports to see who's funding them. I don't know if Elizabeth and Alyssa, you want to chime in as well.
I think when you're trying to make connections with those places that might serve youth, or might be interested in funding organizations that serve youth, you can bring in your story that we received a lot of state funding and that's kind of volatile right now. And so we're reaching out and we really recognize how important it is to diversify and just lean into the truth of the moment.
Yeah, I will say I think I've seen a lot of organizations, Elizabeth, holding back from talking about how much funding they lost or how like the fragility of some of the funding and what's possible. I do think you should speak truth to the moment, but you should also say, this $1 million is not guaranteed. And so if it's not guaranteed, where's binder B and binder C? What are we going to do? And so I do feel like, there's a lot of organizations that haven't made some pivot plans and contingencies. And that's where I would just also name creative capital with your current grant makers. Because again, just from this project we're in right now, they lost $500,000 in some state funding they were expecting, and they got $300K in a 1% interest loan from a donor to cover some of it. So there are other opportunities, and I think that sometimes we get afraid of exploring those because we're not used to doing those other financial sort of pieces, but I think it's definitely something to look into as you move along. And I know I'm being mindful of time, but Elizabeth, I really wanted you to answer the question around the ROI on some of these platforms. I wish Kim Fall from our team was here. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, what are your thoughts on that one?
It depends on your budget size. I have only worked at one organization where I felt like it was where I felt like it was justifiable because they were bringing in so much in grants that the cost of those services was just a little piece of how much they were bringing in. Most other organizations that I've worked with, it's too outlandish of a cost for how many grants you're going to get. And then definitely if you're starting to build a program, it'd be hard to justify in the beginning. Those are my honest thoughts.
Can you, I haven't actually purchased any of them in a long time. Can you cheat the system and have like 3 orgs buy a login together? Like, could you buy a membership and share it with other organizations?
The only one I know off the top of my head is yes, you can do that for instrumental, but
There you go.
I don't want to be like the one to say that.
Cheat the system. No, I was just saying, because I know for like Terry with the consortium with all your member networks, maybe the coalition could purchase it and have a username for several of the partners. And then the
That's
cost can be allocated. Is that what you're doing? Yeah, it can be
yeah, that's what
allocated
we're
throughout.
doing because
Buy it.
you had
Hmm.
suggested that when you were consulting with us, and that has been golden. Thank you.
Good. Good. I love to cheat a system. What can I get for free? Anything else for free? I'll take it.
So there was a question from Judy about when an organization does more advocacy than direct services, how you pitch that, because it's a little bit different of a message. I don't know if there's an example, Alyssa or Elizabeth, that you have.
I'm thinking. Yes, there are some funders who are more interested in that, and you just have to find them. And then they're very open and they know what you're talking about and they speak the same language as you. So it'll take a bit of digging. I might lean into the same suggestion of looking at what other organizations, even nationally, like if you want to see, okay, who else is in this space advocating? Who can we reach out to that might be funding them? That would be my first suggestion on that, more than like how to turn the narrative, but just to find the right partner. Anything else you want to add, Alyssa? Oh, free online grant. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the chat. I'm just
No, go
looking
ahead.
at Sarah.
Do you know
Okay.
any free
Um,
online grants management systems?
Not that are for grants management. I've used Airtable for it with an organization, if you know of that website, which is more of a project management software that you can use a free version of, and it worked decently because it was a medium-sized organization. I've also seen people like interns who are wizards at Google Sheets turn it into everything you need and more. So you can always try that. Tap into some people.
Monday also has a free version, don't
Okay.
they? Monday.com, I
Yeah.
think. So similarly, you could use that.
Yeah, shout out to Airtable. Glad someone else likes it.
So I don't see any more unless I miss them. Is there anyone else that wants to jump in and ask a question live? No? Well, we are all very busy people, that is for sure. So I want to thank Elizabeth and Alyssa and all of you for joining and for your great questions. Alyssa, do you want to say some final words?
No, I'm good. Thank you all so much for being here. And please email us. No question is silly in this landscape. We're here to help. So please reach out and stay in community. And have a good rest of your Wednesday.
Best wishes to everyone.